Okay, today we're going to continue our information on the road to revolution and what caused or what were some causes of the American Revolutionary War. We've already discussed the French and Indian War and how it was a huge battle against the French and the Native Americans and their allies. And of course, Great Britain. We've already discussed that Great Britain won that war, but it was so costly that they did not want to fight another war again. In addition to that, we discussed the fact that because the war was so costly, Great Britain transferred that cost over to the colonists. So today we're going to continue with Closed Notes 2 and Closed Notes 3. So you should have Closed Notes 2 and Closed Notes 3. If you don't have both of these, pause this and go get both of those, Closed Notes 2 and Closed Notes 3. The standards that we're working on, we continue to work on explaining the causes of the American Revolutionary War as they impacted Georgia. Include the French and Indian War, the Proclamation of 1763, which we've already discussed, and we said that the Proclamation of 1763 forbade colonists from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains. They said you cannot move west of there, and if you did move west of there, you had to move back. We're going to get into the Stamp Act, and we're going to get a little bit into the Boston Tea Party. Part B says interpret the three parts of the Declaration of Independence, the preamble, the grievances, and the declaration, and identify the three Georgia signers of the document. We're going to start getting into that. So, go to the section that says control. It should be under Closed Notes 2. There are goals, reaction, Georgia, and then there is control. Throughout the 1700s, the American colonists had become increasingly independent, and they didn't want Great Britain telling them what to do. Great Britain had left the colonies alone to manage their own affairs for years. During the 1760s, England began to assert more control, and the colonists were not happy. If you remember, we talked briefly about the Declaration of Independence, and one of the things they said was that we're tired of y'all telling us what to do. We just recently got a representative to at least vote for us. Although Georgia wasn't that concerned because it was one of the smaller colonies, they didn't even send anybody to the First Continental Congress because they weren't as invested as everybody else was. Taxation. To help alleviate the debt incurred from the war, the British Parliament felt that the colonists should be responsible for some of the financial burden by paying new taxes. Many colonists were angered by the taxation, particularly because there was no colonial representation in the British Parliament. They were upset because they were not allowed to help make the rules that govern what they do. None of the colonies, the 13 colonies, had any representation over in Great Britain. If you remember, the Parliament was the law governing body over in Great Britain, and the colonists had no representation there. So they were already upset. Now you're going to make us pay for this war by paying more taxes. If you look at this picture, it says no Sugar Act, no Tea Act, no Stamp Act. These people do not look very happy because they don't want any more taxes and they don't want to have to pay any more money. They were already forbidden from trading with other countries. Now you're going to impose more taxes to pay for this war that we had. In 1765, England imposed the Stamp Act, which required colonists to buy a government stamp for nearly every paper document that they had. It put a direct tax on items that were commonly used by almost every colonist, like newspapers and licenses and legal documents. Many colonists rebelled, saying that the government should not tax them when they had no representation in Parliament and they weren't going to pay it. That is one of the reasons why we talked about that primary source document when one of the tax collectors came over. The following are some primary documents. The colonial newspaper predicted the Stamp Act would lead to the end of journalism, And there was a notice of the Stamp Act in the newspaper that basically says, here's what you're going to have to do, and here are the taxes that you're going to have to pay. Due to the colonial pressure, the British Parliament eventually repealed the Stamp Act. But even though they repealed the Stamp Act, they just kept issuing other acts and other things. These acts caused even more discontent and began to set the stage for the Revolutionary War. So they eventually repealed the Stamp Act, but they just continued to add one act after another act after another act that continuously cost the colonists money. They were getting more and more angry and more upset. Remember, the Stamp Act was one of those things and these taxes that the Great Britain used to pay for the French and Indian War. If you look at this, another primary source document, it says the repeal or the funeral of the stamp. They don't want the stamp. They want the stamp to just go away, or the Stamp Act to just go away, and they don't want it anymore. If you look, you can see that there are things that show death. We don't want it anymore. We do not want this Stamp Act to go into effect anymore. Georgia. We should be on closed notes 3. Closed notes 3. Georgia's response to the Stamp Act was not as violent as in other colonies. Georgia was actually the only colony where the hated stamps were sold. Georgia's royal governor, James Wright, he's an important person, royal governor James Wright, had much to do with the colony's calm reaction. Georgia wasn't concerned one way or the other because they were a small colony, they weren't that invested, so they weren't really that worried about that Stamp Act. Governor Wright was well liked and had really improved the quality of life in Georgia. Many Georgians knew that he cared about them and wanted to see the colony be prosperous. Governor Wright was very loyal to King George III, and he urged the colonists to remain loyal as well. The Liberty Boys. Despite Governor Wright's influence, there was some resistance to the Stamp Act. On November 6, 1765, a group affiliated with the Sons of Liberty called the Liberty Boys was established to oppose the Stamp Act. The Liberty Boys, along with many other Georgians, were unhappy with the unfair tax on paper goods. Georgia's Liberty Boys meeting in Tundy's Tavern in Savannah. So they had meetings to discuss what they were going to do and how they were going to tackle this situation about the Stamp Act. The American colonists had a Stamp Act Congress in 1765, but Governor Wright did not want Georgia to participate. He refused to call Georgia's legislature into session to even vote on the issue. 9 other colonies sent delegates to the Stamp Act Congress, while Georgia sent none. And if you remember, Georgia was the only colony who did not send anybody to the First Continental Congress where they were meeting to discuss the intolerable acts. Boston. The American colonists were becoming more and more rebellious, particularly in Boston. The Boston Massacre occurred in 1770 when British soldiers fired into an angry mob of protesters, killing 5 colonists. The 1773 Boston Tea Party took place when colonists dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor to protest the Tea Act. They did not want any parts of the Stamp Act. They didn't want any parts of the Tea Act. And as a way to protest the Tea Act, they threw all the tea that they had at the time into the Boston Harbor. Well, what do you think is going to happen? Now, Great Britain is just going to be even more upset. So now things are rising, temperatures are rising, people are getting more and more upset. If you look at this picture, some of the colonists disguised themselves as American Indians as they were dumping the tea into the Boston Harbor just so people would know who they were. But this is a picture of them throwing those big containers of tea into the harbor. Instead of taking them where they were supposed to go, they just started throwing the tea overboard. First Congress, we should be on Road to Revolution closed notes 4. So if you don't have closed notes 4, you should pause this recording and go get closed notes 4. First Congress is at the top of closed notes 4. Other American colonies were outraged and joined in sympathy with Massachusetts, which is where Boston is. These colonies were unified in a belief that the British Parliament was violating their rights. Every colony except Georgia sent representatives to the First Continental Congress of 1774. The First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in 1774. The members wrote protests to England and decided to boycott British goods until taxes and trade regulations were repealed. They also pledged military support to Massachusetts if they were attacked by Great Britain. If you look at this, this is the picture of the people at the First Continental Congress. It says our government, conceived in freedom and purchased with blood, can be preserved only by constant vigilance. So these are the people who were all a part of the First Continental Congress. King George III said the colonies would not become independent without a fight, because if you remember, King George and Great Britain were getting a lot of money from the colonists. So he felt like, no. What you're not going to do is tell me that you're going to be independent. You're going to have to fight for this freedom. And he felt pretty confident because he had already won one. Great Britain had already won one war. On April 19, 1775, the first battle of the American Revolution took place at Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. After several more battles, the Second Continental Congress met in 1775. At first, the Congress tried to find a peaceful solution, but the king would not compromise. He was not giving up money. He was not giving up the things that he wanted. He was not giving up without a fight. Now we're on to the Declaration of Independence, which is one of the most important documents that we are going to talk about thus far. The Second Continental Congress met. When they met, this time Georgia did have a representative there. They chose to officially declare their independence. So they said, we don't care what Great Britain says. We are going to be independent from them because we are tired of all the things that they're doing. We're tired of the taxes. We're tired of the new laws. We're tired of them telling us where to live. They were just tired. The Congress appointed Thomas Jefferson to pen or write a statement outlining the reasons for the colony's separation from Great Britain. On July 4th, 1776, the delegates adopted the Declaration of Independence, which proclaimed to the world that the American colonies were united in the fight for independence. Thomas Jefferson was the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence. He penned or wrote most of it. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're saying that we should be happy and we should be able to tell you as grown people what we want to do. The Declaration announced to King George III that the colonists were united against him. It stated why the colonists declared their independence, and the colonists hoped to win support from countries all over the world. The Declaration also expressed the colonists' belief that everyone deserves natural rights. There are three main parts of the Declaration: the preamble, a list of grievances, and the official declaration. As we go further into this, we're going to break down the Declaration of Independence some more. We've already discussed how it's like a breakup letter from the colonists to England. And we're going to delve more into each part of the Declaration of Independence as we continue our trek to the road to revolution.